How's it going, everybody? It is 5:55 on Monday afternoon, evening, however you want to call it, and it is about to rain. It is about to rain. Something crazy. But it's time for another episode of Riding in Cars with Cards. This is the show by me, Adam, host of Homeward Path, and we're talking, instead of the evergreen focus that Homeward Path has kind of taken on, we are talking about specific cards, decks, formats, events, all that good stuff. I'm trying to keep my tournament reports and standard and modern brewing in this venue, and then more important stuff on the podcast. So this week's episode is going to be a little different than any of the rest of them that I've done, because this is going to be my first tournament report, and it's not an important one. It's an FNM. That's all. But it's an FNM in which I found out the format we were playing about an hour and a half before the event, and I didn't have a deck built, so I just went through my cards, slapped together the best deck I could. We did the same thing for Brett, who had come down to play. We were expecting to play Standard and ended up playing Modern. I slapped together a build of Is It Phoenix. I used a template from Goldfish and then substituted for cards that I just didn't have, and I'm not going to go out of my way to get before an FNM. Whether those cards are integral to the strategy or not, quite frankly, because once we figured out that FNM was going to be Modern, we just kind of written it off. We had zero expectations for ourselves going in. So, how did it go? Well, better than I thought it would. It went better than I thought it was going to. We combined for a record of 4-3-1. I went 2-1-1, Brett went 2-2. I finished 5th, Brett finished 6th. We had 18 players, which was pretty impressive in and of itself, just to have that many games going on at once in the store. We don't get that very often. Turns out the reason we had to stick to Modern is because we had a large group testing for a Modern 3K in Selmer, Tennessee this past weekend, and apparently it worked out well because 4 of our store's people top 8'd the event. So we were doing something right. So let's dive into the actual tournament itself. Again, I went 2-1-1. Brett went 2-2. So I'm going to break down the round by round, kind of what we played against, notable things that happened, that kind of thing. So round 1, I played against Teamer Reclamation. I know. This was not supposed to be Standard, but I was playing, I was playing Arclight Phoenix and my opponent was playing Teamer Reclamation. Apparently we didn't get the memo. The build of Teamer Reclamation was designed by one Ryan Hickman, who has appeared, or at least his deck has appeared on Homeward Path before. And I mean, this thing was kind of a thing of beauty because it was designed to be a Teamer control deck. Like, Growth Spiral powers out turn 3 Cryptic Command, and then we have Snapcasters and I think a fun of Torrential Gear Hulk, if I'm not mistaken. But by and large, the deck is just a Teamer control deck that just happens to play Wilderness Reclamation, Expansion Explosion, and 1 copy of Nexus of Fate. And your win condition is whatever you have on the board. That or your Nexus turn giving you, another Expansion Explosion. So whatever the case may be, it was better than I thought it was going to be. I spent a lot of time in the first game trying to figure out what in the world was going on. And then once I did, it was a little too late, but I managed to apply a lot of pressure, but not enough at the right time. 5/5 Terramander ended up getting bounced by a flashback to Cryptic Command via Snapcaster, and I never quite recovered the pressure that it was dealing. Terramander was occupying the Thing in the Ice slot because I don't have Thing in the Ice. Just like I had other cards occupying the Pyromancer Ascension and Metamorphose slots. I just don't have those cards, and I'm not going out of my way to get them before an FNM. So game 1 took half an hour to finish because my opponent Was not particularly comfortable with the deck. Spent a lot of time kind of in the tank trying to figure out what to do. Once we got into game 2, things kind of sped up a little bit. I got the nuts, attacked for 10 on turn 3, forced him to have cryptic on 4. Like, we just applied a lot of pressure and made him interact, and got there really quickly. But unfortunately, game 3 started with about 3 minutes left in the round. Once he sideboarded again based on how I sideboarded, and knowing that he was going to be on the play, we were down to 3 minutes by the time we were starting game 3. And then game 3 was, of course, we went to time. I was on the attack. I was up 20-14 when we started extra turns. By the time we got to the end of extra turns, it was 20-8 in my favor, and game was ruled a draw. So that left us at 1-1-1 and a draw. Brett, meanwhile, just savagely 2-0 smashed humans with budget is it wizards. The thunderous wizards from the MTG Goldfish article, with a little bit of a sideboard swerve that I don't want to bring up because I'm a little embarrassed about it, but I mean, it was cool. And it worked exactly once, and something like that, I guess that's all you need, right? But, I mean, by and large, we made a concession. I'll be discussing this much, much more in depth in the podcast episode later this week. But we made a concession to the fact that we were just never going to beat the graveyard decks, so we didn't even try. So instead, our sideboards were like extra copies of effects we wanted in the main deck, or extra copies of extra threats that were a little bit harder to interact with than the other ones we were playing, that kind of stuff. It wasn't a great plan, but it was a plan, and it's important to have one. But Brett just demolished humans in 2 games. So we went to round 2, and Brett played against the good Is It Phoenix list in the room, and I played against Counters Company. And this was a tighter matchup than it really had any business being, according to my opponent. But, I mean, there's worse things in the world, I suppose, than a really, really tight matchup that ultimately didn't come out in my favor. I ended up losing the game in 3, or losing the round in 3. Game 1, I thought he was out of gas. I thought he didn't have the win condition in his hand. So I just went ahead and made an attack. I said, I got to turn the corner, because if I just sit here and durdle for the rest of the game, I'm never going to win. And I made an attack. I used my mana, and he had the Walking Ballista in his hand, so it didn't matter. Game 2, I got the nuts again. I just attacked for 10 on turn 3, and he does a little bit of math, looks at his hand, scoops him up. Let's go to game 3. And then game 3, we have Giver of Runes and Burnt and Forge Tender coming in against us, and that is not something I really considered all that much, except with cards like Vapor Snag and Void Snare, which I included as Vapor Snag as outs to problematic creatures, or a really big tempo swing against Delve creatures, being able to bounce them back to my opponent's hand, make them exile cards all over again for them. And then Void Snare was a 1-turn out to Leyline of the Void, wherein I could bounce the Leyline and then proceed to have a big Phoenix turn free from Leyline's influence just for 1 mana. And we doubled down on that a little bit with a 1+1 split of Echoing Truth, both for Chalice on 1, Leyline, and tokens decks in general. Decks that wanted to go really wide with tokens, Echoing Truth here for that. So, game 3 was really, really tight. I feel like I played the game well, put myself in a position to win, and just didn't draw threats. That was the big issue. There were several times where I just had him with a bunch of dead cards in his hand. He literally could not assemble the combo. And I just couldn't find anything to tighten the screws. I couldn't find anything to beat him down with. What are you going to do? Brett got 2-0'd in rather savage fashion by the other Is It Phoenix player. And here we were, Brett at 1-1, me at 0-1-1, and we are positive that our exact expectations of the evening are about to be met, which are, both of us having horrible records, not getting anything back out of our time, and just, the biggest reward for the entry fee spent being the time spent playing Magic, which is a reward in and of itself, but still. Then we get to round 3. And Brett played against Ryan Hickman, the designer of the Teamer Reclamation deck, with Mono Red Prison, while I played against Jeremy Neville with Grixis Delver. The Grixis Delver matchup was really close. Even though I won it in 2 games, it was a really close match. Phoenix does a lot of work when your opponent doesn't draw Graveyard Hate. Fun fact. Phoenix does a lot of work when your opponent doesn't draw Graveyard Hate. But then Brett, on the other hand, just demolished Ryan in 2 games. Like, we were 15 minutes into the round and the 2 of them had gotten up and come over to watch what I was doing. It weren't pretty. So that left us with a little bit of a break. I did some catching up with my cousin who's in from California and thinking about picking up the game again before we settled down for round 4. And I played against Zach Morgan and Rakdos Octomancer, which was sweet. Like, the build that Ryan came up with of that deck for Zach to play, one of the coolest little brews I've ever seen. So a lot of the cards seem right at home. We're a pile of removal, we're a pile of card draw in the form of Seasoned Pyromancer, Faithless Looting, but then we're going off the beaten path a little bit because, we're playing Young Pyromancer, Seasoned Pyromancer, or as we referred to it there at the shop, Cajun Pyromancer. But the other angle that Zach and Ryan and by extension Zach were playing on was the idea of playing 3-drop creatures that had a really big impact alongside a package of Dreadhorde Arcanist and Unearth. Unearth in particular was really good already with the Seasoned Pyromancer, and reasonable with Young Pyromancer if you're just buying it back for 1 mana and then you're following it up with another spell. Like, that's fine. But the biggest thing that he was doing that was way off the beaten path was playing Lightning Skelemental, or as we lovingly referred to it during spoiler season, Bulb Lightning. That thing is kind of gross when you can buy it back for 1 mana. And that thing hit me a couple of times over the course of the evening. Thankfully, I just seemed to draw all my lands every game, and it didn't seem to matter. But regardless, it was a ton of fun. Brett, on the other hand, played a really, really tight 2-game set against Blue-White Control, in which in Game 2, his sideboard Swerve came in and did a little bit of work, almost pulled him back into the game, and then Charles drew the out and got him. So, what are you going to do? At 2-1-1, I slid into 5th place, and because we had enough people that evening, I ended up earning 2 packs for my trouble. So, that was cool. It was nice to get something back. Brett finished right behind me in 6th. And considering the number of people and the fact that we found out we were playing Modern with barely enough time to build a deck and a sideboard and come up with a plan, I don't feel too bad about how we did. Like, we definitely could have done better, both in the building phase and in play, but it was more fun than I was expecting. Notable, there were 0 copies of Hogak in our entire 18-person tournament. Not a one. There was one person who is in the process of building it that is like holding off on getting the last few cards because we're positive it's going to get a ban. But other than that, like, it's just not a lot going on here. We played a lot of, there were Is It Phoenix, there were humans, there were the Pyromancer and Delver decks, and then we had just some weird stuff all over the place. it was a good time. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to doing the next one. And then, speaking of next one, our next content release this week is going to be on probably Friday morning. It's going to be Homeward Path. And this week's topic, just to let you mull it over, the importance of having a plan. So we'll catch you later.